Hi, this is Mike Friedman, and with me today is Oscar Chavez, candidate for the town council in this upcoming May special election. And today he and I are going to have an in-depth conversation about two impactful topics that are likely to come before the council in the first 6 months of his tenure or whoever ends up winning the election. And so I wanted to use the opportunity to try and do a deeper dive into these two issues, both to get a sense of how prepared Oscar is to step in on day one and really dive into these issues, and two, to get a feel for how he's going to approach and potentially vote on these issues. So before we get started, Oscar, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. And Michael, thank you for putting on this Q&A or this one-on-one meeting. So my name is Oscar Chavez, and I am a candidate for Windsor Town Council. I've lived here in Windsor for 13 years, and I care deeply about our town. I think that I am the most qualified candidate, to lead Windsor on the council. I am currently the Assistant Director for the Sonoma County Department of Human Services. It is the largest department in the county. We lead and manage a budget of about $350 million and over 1,000 staff. I've been an Executive Director of a large nonprofit here in Sonoma County, managing $10 million budgets, overseeing 250 staff. I understand the complexity of how government works. And, during the fires, I managed the Windsor Evacuation Center. And since then, I've been heavily involved in disaster preparedness across our county. So I'm ready to step in on day one, and I hope to do that if I'm successful.
Thank you, Oscar, for that introduction. So let's move into the financial aspects of the Windsor's financial health. In January, the town council got some sobering news from its financial consultants, indicating that we were potentially running a long-term systemic debt or revenue. There was a potential long-term revenue gap. Since that time, the town's gotten a bunch of good news. We're getting a chunk of money out of the federal stimulus bill. And accounting, sort of when the financial consultants presented the materials, they hadn't accounted for a couple of things like the potential revenue from the McClelland Hotel and some improved sales tax projections. But I've sort of run the numbers over the last week, and factoring in both the improved news of the stimulus and the other kinds of things, it doesn't seem to completely cover the revenue gap. We seem to go from the very foreboding $1.8 million a year gap down to about $650,000 a year gap. And my question to you is, how do you approach covering that gap?
Right. Well, that's a fantastic question, Michael. I think you're right. The town is projected to have a structural deficit, and as you know, that's primarily driven by its pension obligation and pension requirements. And it's not an issue unique to Windsor. This is really a unique or an issue impacting all towns and cities across our state and really across our nation. There's no doubt that the federal stimulus bill will provide some short-term support, but it won't address the long-term structural problem that I understand will be between $500,000 to $2 million. And so you've got to look at that and think about how are you going to phase in cuts over time to close the gap. One of the things that I've learned is that the town will be switching from PERS to PEPRA. It's a new pension plan that will help, won't completely resolve the issue, but the town will have to make some difficult choices about where to cut. And it's really limited in terms of the kinds of cuts it can make. You can either increase fees You can either cut services, you can reduce staff, and all of those have consequences, as you know. So it'll be really, you have to take a really thoughtful approach and really understand the consequences of those decisions. But there's no question that there will have to be some cuts to be made over the next couple of years.
So do you view this primarily as something in which we have to retrench as opposed to trying to enhance our revenues in town?
Well, those are the two options, right? You can either make cuts or you can look at increasing revenues. And as you know, the primary sources or the largest sources of revenue for the town are the TOT taxes, sales taxes, and property taxes. So if you want to grow your revenues, those are the three areas where you're going to do it.
So on sales tax, there's sort of two ways of going about looking at that. One is to try and enhance the amount of dollars that actually get spent within Windsor. And the second is to consider adding sort of a small bump to the 8.25% that is sort of the standard state amount. You know, the Windsor is one of the few towns in the county that doesn't have its sort of own small incremental town tax that gets added to the sales tax. And so do you see either of those as the more viable option?
Well, I think you can certainly increase your sales tax. I don't know that people are excited about, paying more for taxes. The other concern I have about raising taxes is that it tends to impact more of our lower wage or lower income households who tend generally to pay more in sales tax. So I would not be in favor of that necessarily. I would like to look at other ways of raising revenue.
Though that's true, doesn't Windsor have the lowest sales tax, in the immediate region? And, don't most Windsor residents spend as much money outside of the town as inside the town?
I don't know exactly how much money is spent outside the town. I know that has been a source of pride for the council to keep the taxes as low as possible. But I would want to understand, what is the need for wanting to raise our taxes, and what do we hope to achieve from it? So just raising taxes for the sake of raising taxes, that doesn't make sense to me. I would want to understand what is the problem that we're trying to solve.
Well, if I told you that when I've crunched the numbers, that if we added 1/8 of a cent to the sales tax as the, sort of the town addition, so we get all 1/8 of a cent, based on our current sales tax revenue on a yearly basis, that seems to compute out to roughly $500 million in gross receipts that get taxed within the town limits, or all the various formulas that happen. So an eighth of a percent increase would yield Windsor, with no changes to the gross amount, the $650,000 a year. So it would cover the structural deficit, and hence the benefit would be we would not have to do cuts within town. And as you already pointed out, where you cut is somewhat limited, and they tend to be in areas that have greater impact on the residents, because things like Parks and Rec and those kinds of stuff are areas where you have a little bit of wiggle room. So if the numbers worked out where an 1/8 of a cent increase in the sales tax would cover the structural deficit, and it were used that way to avoid having to make the cuts, what would your response be?
Well, I definitely would look at that, Michael. And I would look at not just the sales tax, but look at other sources of ways in which we could raise revenues. But that is certainly an option. And if I were on the council, I would definitely look at that as an option.
The other two options that you mentioned in terms of increased revenues to the town are TOT, hotel tax, occupancy taxes and property taxes. On the hotel taxes, as I said, that the McClelland Hotel, I was already factoring in to get us down to the $650,000 deficit. So that would be, that would be a wash. It would not add any additional TOT into the projection. And the Town Green project, all of its TOT funds are projected to go for the payment of the debt for building the new civic buildings. So that, in addition, would not add to our, revenue to cover the revenue gap. So would you advocate, looking at building even more hotels in town?
Well, I would want to understand, what we currently have now and what we could actually support, keeping in mind the potential impact of additional tourism. I know that here in our town, we want to make sure that we find balance between the number of hotels we build, tourism, and making sure that we can manage that appropriately. While I won't say that, I wouldn't advocate for additional hotels, that's something that I would definitely want to look at. And what would inform my decision is making sure that we find a good balance between, managing tourism and being able to meet the needs of our town.
So if I were to summarize, it sounds like your position is we will likely need to look at making some cuts in the budget in order to help, cover the structural deficit. If there are opportunities for revenue enhancements, they can be considered, but, at first the primary tool will be, making some reductions in order to give ourselves long-term health. Is that fair?
Well, I think that's fair. The other piece of that is how quickly we can get this revenue online. It takes years to get some of these projects built. So we may need to make some cuts in the short term until those additional revenue sources come online.
Yeah, my hope is that certainly was going to be required given the old numbers and without the fiscal stimulus. My hope is that with the fiscal stimulus, that will placate the issues for at least 2 to 3 years. But we'll find out in April and May how true that is. The consultants will be back. But hopefully the good news is we need to react, but we have more time to react. And that's where really that question comes from.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, we're certainly buying time with the additional federal money, and I think it's projected to be about $5 million, but it doesn't address the long-term structural deficit that I think has to be addressed. And the good thing is, I think it'll give the town some time to really vet all of the potential areas to look at to shore up that long-term structural deficit.
If it turns out that cuts need to be made, or either long-term or short-term, as you said, it's sort of difficult to find where cuts would be made, but can you name a few?
Well, I think, there's only a couple of options that the town has. It can either reduce services to the town. It could increase fees. It can, work with their employees to negotiate, salaries and benefits, and those things aren't popular. They have to be negotiated with the unions. So those are some of the ways short term in which it can reduce its spending, including deferring some maintenance or not investing in some of the capital outlay that it may require, like a new HR system or an IT system. So there are ways in which it can reduce its spending, including implementing a hiring freeze. Again, these are not popular things that towns or cities want to be doing, but they may be necessary to close those gaps in the short term.
but those are largely, a number of those are largely short-term stopgap fixes, right? You know, they're the kinds of things that we've used in past years to get us through recessions or the like. It would sound like, you know, to deal with a systemic, you know, long-term issues, you'd be looking more at cuts that could last for 10 years or 12 years and be able to restore if certain revenues come online that you're hoping for, you know, in the future. Is that?
Well, that's correct. You know, I mean, already we struggle to find talent, you know, and so we want to make sure that salaries are competitive, the benefit packages are competitive. Anytime that you make some of those cuts, it impacts morale. So those are the kinds of concerns that you have to build into your equations of where you're going to cut. Residents enjoy high quality services. They expect their parks to look nice and to be accessible. And so you also want to be mindful of the kinds of services that would negatively impact the town residents. So again, I think these are important conversations to also be having with the town residents to involve them in the process and in really understanding the financial impact or financial hardship that the town may face.
Yeah, I agree. And you know, I think the only one other thing is, you know, the town's no longer in its infancy. It's more of a teenager, young adult. And, you know, that's the period of time in which some of its infrastructure begins to, you know, need more maintenance. You know, in the early years, you put in the new infrastructure and you're well off. And so there's also that factor as well, as in terms of the trade-offs between delaying doing certain maintenance type solutions, you know, that need to get done, and the longer term cost of when you come back to do them, you know, because they've actually aged out. So all good thoughts. Maybe for a moment we can put the financial questions aside and talk for about 15 minutes or so about the Town Green project.
Sure.
Okay. The Town Green project is going to be a complicated project in that it involves, you know, sort of a somewhat unique public-private relationship, certainly a financial relationship between the commercial property and the, you know, the construction of the civic buildings. And so there's a variety of things involved in the overall project. There's a lot of moving pieces, but we don't know what all those pieces are at the moment. We've gotten a preliminary sketch, but in April, we're supposedly going to get much more details about both the form of the project as well as a deep dive into the financial analysis of the project. And so for most of this conversation, what I want to do is have a conversation about, you know, benefits of the project, risks of the project, and consequences of the project. So we'll largely stay there. But before we go into those, do you have a general opinion about the project?
Well, you know, one of the things that in talking to a lot of the business folks down on the green and some of the people, you know, I've been walking neighborhoods. I think there's a general consensus that we do want the town green to be developed in the way that it was originally envisioned, that you would have retail on all sides of the square. And so I see that as a tremendous opportunity to be able to increase and have more foot traffic to support our downtown merchants. So I'm in favor of doing that. I think the hotel as an anchor could provide additional tourist tourism and opportunities to have more foot traffic, more wallets, to be able to support our local businesses. As you know, and you probably have heard, a lot of concerns about the size of the project and this sense of, or this felt sense of loss of the green. And so those are very legitimate concerns. They're concerns for me as well. And so I'm curious to see what changes are being proposed when the developer comes back, and has he taken into consideration the concerns from the community. And so I can't commit one way or the other. I really want to see what is being proposed. But generally, I think having an anchor on the green and increasing foot traffic is something that I would be in favor of.
That makes sense. And you've hit on a number of the potential benefits, particularly for the downtown businesses. But I'd like to sort of focus for the moment on the benefits to the town residents. How do the town residents in particular benefit from having a luxury hotel in the downtown area?
Well, I think it provides an opportunity to bring in additional retail to the town green. So, Windsor could be a destination, for us to have more shopping options rather than having to go to Santa Rosa. So I really see that as a benefit for our town. It's been disheartening to see a lot of these small shops having to close over the years. I've been here 13 years, and I've seen businesses come in and go, and they've had to go under because the foot traffic hasn't been there. Our restaurants do well, but we don't have a lot of success with our smaller retail stores. So I think it would provide additional shopping opportunities for local residents.
And as for the new civic buildings, how do town residents benefit from having new civic buildings?
Well, I think those buildings are very old, and having a new civic, or having a new facility, an expanded library would certainly be good for residents. I think that our law enforcement, they need to have new facilities. The facilities that they have are not adequate. I served on the Windsor school board as a trustee, and we didn't have adequate space to do any training. We're just very limited in the kinds of, or how we can utilize those spaces. So having a new civic center would certainly provide, greater opportunities to do additional trainings for the schools, to have an expanded library, and for the police station, or for the police department to have an adequate station.
I understand how, having an adequate station for the police improves, the ability, or, the life of the police force. But I'm not quite getting the connection with how that improves. What benefits do the town residents see that accrue out of something like that?
Yeah, the other thing to think about is the long-term cost of maintaining older facilities. At some point, those facilities have to be upgraded. And so this is an opportunity, I think, for the town to be able to do that in this kind of partnership.
That makes sense. What you're saying is at some point we're going to have to bite the bullet and, do major renovation either on what's there or build new buildings. And a benefit to the town here is we have an opportunity to do that where it may have lower financial impact on the residents.
Correct.
That a good summary?
Yes.
You've also talked about the benefits to the businesses downtown, and you've somewhat alluded to that by having a more vibrant set of businesses downtown, the town residents benefit. Do you see any other benefits to the town residents other than they get to, they get to shop at the stores that, also presumably are attractive to people from the hotel?
Well, I think there could be some additional opportunities to have more events downtown. And so those are exciting opportunities. I'm very interested in making sure that that we are culturally responsive and that the town green can continue to be a place that can attract people from different cultures and nationalities. I've been concerned that when I go down there, I don't see a lot of our Latino community members enjoy the green. So I would like to be intentional about making that place very inclusive of all members that currently live in our community. So I would love to see more cultural events on the town green to really allow for more of our residents to access that as a public space and to really celebrate the diversity that we enjoy here in our town.
Okay, maybe we can move on now from the benefits to the risks. As I was saying before, there's going to be this public-private relationship between the developer and the hotel operator and the town, because we're going to be tying the ability to pay for the construction of the new civic buildings to the revenue generated by the commercial side of the project. And that's going to involve both very detailed financial analysis. I don't know whether the town is also engaged with somebody to do a risk analysis, as well as a whole slew of legal documents around that relationship. What experience do you have? Well, if you are elected, you'll be asked to represent us in terms of really culling through all those documents and ensuring that the town is protected. So what is your experience in taking a project that has this type of complexity, being able to analyze it not only for its ability to deliver on its financials, but also its ability to deliver legally in terms of potential legal hurdles down the road?
Right, Mike, as you know, the devil is always in the detail. And as someone who has managed construction projects in the past, I built the Head Start Preschool Center in Windsor years ago, and I've had experience with construction management. But you're absolutely right. I think we have to approach this project not just thinking about the benefits, but understanding the risk and what are the potential losses that would be realized if we pursue this project. So I think you have to look at both sides of it. And I think that the town would be wise. And if I were elected, I would want some outside legal counsel to review the document to make sure that the document is skewed in such a way that it protects the town. As you know, there's a lot of concern about developers backing out of their deals, and I don't think that's right. I think we have to hold developers accountable and for them not to make promises that they can't live up to. And so that is something that I would be seriously looking at and want to make sure that we can incorporate all potential safeguards to protect the town and the residents of any potential risk or fallout.
And sort of to go into some more detail, here are some potential risks, and I'm kind of interested in how if you have ideas on how the town can mitigate that risk. One is that the hotel construction is delayed. We all know that any construction often is delayed, and hence the hotel comes online later than we had projected, and hence the revenues don't come in as quickly as we thought. And with us wanting to build the new civic buildings ahead of the hotel being built, how do you protect yourself from those kinds of delays and those revenue delays?
Yeah, Mike, I know that in some contracts, you know, there are penalties embedded in the project delay. So those are some of the things that I would want to look at. But I would also want to look at a very realistic timeline to make sure that we're not sort of over promising and under delivering over time. Again, I think we have to be very sober about you know, how long is it going to take, and really understands the potential risk. Who knows, you know, we may run into another recession. We have to take that into account. So I would want to put all of those potential risks on the table and be very cautious and real about the likelihood that we would face a delay or the likelihood that it would get done on time.
Yeah, very apt on the on the you know, the question about developers sort of having penalties, because you know that seemed to have come up a number of times with this particular developer and his project in Healdsburg, its luxury hotel project in Healdsburg. And it seemed like he was able to get away with a number of times the argument that, well, the town hadn't met all of its time schedule as well, and hence he wasn't either to blame or entirely to blame. So it's an area, I think, that you're very right to be focused on, you know, as this project comes into more detail. How about you know, just on the Civic Center buildings themselves, that cost overruns, if you since you've done major development projects, you know that cost overruns are common. How do you protect the town from the Civic Center buildings costing more than their projected amount? Because at least in the first financial analysis, there wasn't a lot of wiggle room, that the amount of revenue that was going to be generated by the hotel basically met, you know, with very little dollars left over, if any, the loan payments we would have to make on the projected cost of the civic buildings.
Yeah, I think a lot of these projects, you know, you always built in contingencies and cost overruns. But one of the things that I've learned is the value of having a really good project manager overseeing, or a construction manager overseeing your projects. And so I would want to make sure that all of those things are in place, and again, have very realistic timelines, and making sure that we can address any potential issues ahead of time, you know, in the pre-development phase, so that we don't run into any delays when we start the development projects. You know, I know that corner there where the Civic Center is projected to go, there's I believe it's like an oil facility. I want to make sure that that if that's a brownfield, that we can mitigate and remediate that, and not for that to cause further delays. And the sooner that can be done, the better, if the town does choose to move forward with this project. And so again, it's making sure that we do our due diligence and mitigate any potential issues and address them now before they become problematic and costly down the road.
So the last risk I'll ask you about is bankruptcy. How do you, because this is a public-private partnership, how do you protect the town from either the developer or the hotel operator from using bankruptcy as a way to renegotiate or get out of any agreement with the town?
You know, Michael, that's a really good question. And to be honest with you, I think that is, I don't have expertise in terms of, you know, legal background, but you raise a really good question. And I think any city would be wise to ask that of their legal counsel, to say, what safeguards could we embed in our contract so that the contractor doesn't have an out, or the developer doesn't have an out? Because we've seen this happen too many times in other communities. And so, like, you know, we have to be smarter than that. And so that's one of the things, if elected, that I would be asking is, you know, we want to make sure that we can protect the town and to mitigate any potential risk and not give the developer an out. and certainly, not use bankruptcy as a tool to relieve itself of the responsibility to the town and the residents of Windsor.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because, I'm also not an expert in any of this, but my limited understanding is the bankruptcy model for businesses are quite liberal in this area because of the U.S. wanting to really foster, ability for businesses to take risks and to sort of turn over. So I do think this is a very important area in question, and one where it may be difficult to come up with a fully satisfactory solution. Maybe we can move on to potential consequences of the project. Let's see. I'm sorry, I'm quickly looking at my notes. So some people are worried that the nature of the downtown businesses will change. Basically, that they'll evolve over time to target those who are staying at the luxury hotel rather than downtown residents. In effect, the simple way of folks talking about it is will turn into Healdsburg, where you commonly hear that a lot of residents don't like going downtown anymore. What would you tell these people?
Well, I would tell them that, that's a legitimate concern. I, as a father of 4 boys, I want to be able to take my kids and my wife out to dinner. And, we have a price point. We can't spend a lot of money when you've got to, pay for a meal for 6 people. And so I want to make sure that the businesses and the restaurants provide a range of options for people, and not for it to be high end and high cost. And so again, knowing what we want, we have to think about, how do we preserve that, and how do we make sure that the green can remain, can have that kind of diversity. The last thing I want people to do is not feel as if the green isn't their own, because it is. It is a public space, it's a public asset, and it needs to remain that way.
What I've never quite figured out, though, is how the town council can really impact that, which is, what business goes into what stores, that's the business owner's decision. And, they're going to chase who they see as their customer. The one area I think you do have an impact, or a greater impact, is things like the number of tasting rooms in the downtown. So I'd like you to both speak about how you think that the town council can generally impact, the style of businesses in the downtown, and then more specifically looking at potentially businesses catering directly to, tourist experiences, like things like tasting rooms and the like, and how you think the town council should address those things where it can.
Yeah, as you know, we have a lot of tasting rooms downtown, and I think that in this current environment, those are the ones that are kind of thriving. I think if we had more people, more wallets on the green, that would allow for additional retail kind of stores. I was really sad to see the Kaleidoscope toy store close. And it just didn't get the foot traffic. So I think having more foot traffic would allow for additional kind of retail beyond tasting rooms and restaurants. So I think that's one way that you can address that.
Yeah, but I'm not really sure, or, do you think that the typical person staying in a hotel room that's $500, $600 a night is going to be shopping at the local toy store?
Well, I just use the toy store as an example of retail, but generally, people who come to and stay here, do shop. I know that, when I go to other communities, I like to shop in the downtown areas and like to buy local products. So I think it also provides an opportunity for us to tout our Windsor products as well.
I agree with that. It's just the question originally was about whether that's really going to begin to skew, the worry that by some residents that the businesses will then tend to orient to those customers. And, people who are paying $500 and $600 a night have different ideas on what kind of clothes shops they're shopping in, or other kinds of businesses.
Right.
On the tasting rooms, yeah, we have tasting rooms downtown, but it's nothing like Healdsburg, right? Healdsburg has evolved from something like the number of tasting rooms that Windsor now has into a mess, back in the days when they had very low prices on barrel tasting tickets on those weekends, because people could just camp out and walk, around town drinking all day. That was really where I was getting at, that, is there a point in which the town council, as part of putting the project together, should consider having a strict limit on the number of tasting rooms that are in downtown, particularly since it seems to want to enhance and promote the sort of the beverage community on Bell Road and near the Russian River Brewing Company.
Right. Michael, I think you bring up a really good point about sort of finding that balance. We tout ourselves as being a family-friendly town. And so I think, we have to be able to live up to that statement. And I would look to other jurisdictions, who have confronted the similar problem. We're not the only ones, but I would like to understand, what have other communities done to be able to mitigate, just like, how we try to mitigate issues around gentrification. What could we do to make sure that we can ward off some of that concern? And so I would be interested in understanding not only what we can do, but what other communities have successfully done to be able to mitigate some of those concerns.
Some other worries that people have, and you've already touched on this a little bit, is that the hotel will either make it less inviting for the town residents to come to the town green, or may make the town residents more uncomfortable. They may be concerned for safety reasons. What would you tell those folks?
Well, again, I would say, I would want to look at the design of the hotel, and I would ask those questions. How does the design of this structure invite the town residents, and how does it provide for safety concerns? I've not seen those plans, but I think those are two important questions that we ought to be asking, and invite the public.
Do you have examples of hotels that are sort of a key part of the downtown, part of a green, where you've seen it be successful? In terms of I hear you saying I'd like to ask those questions, and it might be more concrete if you could say, hey, if it's something like X.
Yeah, well, I think it would be something that would be accessible, that doesn't have sort of walls around it to say, this is our space and this is your space, right? Something where you could see the flow, and that it really feels inviting, and it feels like, hey, we're part of this larger community. You can go in there and experience it, and you can feel like, wow, this place feels very, very inviting, and it doesn't feel like some ivory tower. Right. So those are the things that I would want to look to.
And some people, sort of like things the way they are. They find it comforting, and or they find that having the library adjacent to the screen, or in the gym adjacent to the screen, as being inviting, as sort of making that all feel like it's all part of the town, community there. What would you tell those people?
Well, I think I've heard those same concerns about the library, and I would I want to see whether or not that was incorporated into the new design. So I haven't seen the plans, but that is, again, it's something that I would want to look at.
Well, thank you. That's all the time we have for today. I really appreciate it, Oscar, for you taking the time, and for giving us very thoughtful answers to a wide variety of issues, or not issues, but a wide variety of going deep on those two issues. So I appreciate it, and I wish you all the luck.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael. And thank you for doing this as well.